In all of these cases, and one should add the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or projects in Africa, these transport projects provided often for the first time the beginning of the construction of modern infrastructure in countries of the developing sector. They always bring an improvement in the speed and access for the movement of goods and people, save an enormous amount of time, always create a framework for investments in industry and agriculture, sometimes are enlarged with investments in energy production and distribution and communication, and often are the beginning of entire development corridors, opening up landlocked areas for development, as one could see with the joy and pride of President Widodo announcing the opening of the Yakarta-Bandung high-speed railway at the occasion of this G20 summit in Bali. These projects contain within them the hope for a better future of the respective country. The tragic earthquake occurring within days after the G20 summit in Indonesia on the island of Java just underlines the need to finally install a global earthquake early warning system, which Chinese and Russian scientists are working on, since the effect of such natural disasters can only be minimized through better infrastructure systems. If one looks in the history of the development of the so-called advanced countries, let it be the United States, Germany, Japan, the building of a grid of national infrastructure was always the beginning of industrialization. The criticism by the West of the BRI that it would be an effort by China to take over the world, great debt traps, great dependencies, etc., are thinly veiled cover stories. The former colonial powers had a long time to build railways, roads, and industrial parks in their former colonies, but obviously they didn't. So the BRI has spread so quickly by finding the cooperation with 140 countries because these nations often see the participation in the BRI as the first real chance to overcome poverty and underdevelopment and create a hopeful future for their citizens. It is the natural course of the advancement of mankind that eventually all nations will enjoy the infrastructural, industrial, and agricultural conditions for a decent living standard of their populations. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, which destroyed approximately 500 million jobs, and the ongoing threat of a world famine, the world needs the creation of around 1.5 billion new productive jobs. Many of these can be facilitated by developing continentally integrated grids of railways, highways, waterways in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, as well as creating the energy requirements for an improved living standard of the people in the global south. The fact that circa 2 billion people don't have access to clean water points to the need to create new fresh water sources through water management, as well as the investments in desalination projects with the help of small nuclear reactors, ionization of the atmosphere, or accessing aquifers. One of the most exciting projects of the BRI is the ongoing engagement of Chinese companies building a massive science city in Iraq under the landmarked Oil for Projects agreement signed with Baghdad in 2019. There are other such science city projects underway with different countries of the global south, which will allow them to educate a great number of students in advanced sciences, and in this way make it possible for the country to leapfrog from underdevelopment to a modern, science-oriented economy. While the world economy overall has been sluggish, investments in infrastructure in Europe and the US are dangerously lagging behind, and geopolitically motivated sanctions are completely backlashing against especially European economies. The Chinese economy and the BRI have been the true motor of the world economy. China is the largest trade partner for the US, for the EU and ASEAN. But the most important aspect of the BRI projects is that they are all investments in physical economy. Therefore, they represent real assets as compared to investments in monetary values which can evaporate in a crash. These investments remain physical assets, even if many of the monetarist values are being wiped out by the hyperinflation now threatening the financial sector of the neoliberal system. The most significant challenge comes from a negative shift in the attitude of some Western governments, think tanks and media, which first ignored the largest infrastructure project in the history of mankind, the BRI, for over 4 years. But then from 2017 on, they started to portray the BRI as an expression of China's imperial designs. Initially, many people and entrepreneurs in the US and European nations reacted very enthusiastically to the new Silk Road once they learned about it, for example, from the Schiller Institute or people doing business with China. After the politicians of some Western countries, their think tanks and media started to paint China as strategic competition and systemic rival, the public opinion became influenced negatively. This could be reversed, however, because the present tumultuous political developments with challenges even to the existence of some European nations as industrial states, more efforts have to be made to show the advantages these European nations would have if they engage in joint ventures together with China in investments in third countries. Under conditions of hyperinflation and even energy blackouts, the cooperation with China can become the lifeboat for many countries. So far, neither the United States nor the EU has come up with anything to match China's Belt and Road Initiative. The so-called Build Back Better plan was repeatedly reduced in size, scope and cost, ultimately rejected through procedural tactics used in the Congress, and bits of it finally included in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The EU's global gateway is already delivering, Ursula von der Leyen claimed in her State of the Union speech in September. But the question is, for whom? She did not mention the word development once. There is no fresh money allocated for it, and it is just a rebranding of previous plans like the Juncker plan, which went nowhere, since it counted on a combination of public investments, loan guarantees and private investments, which never came. The key problem is that the G7 has no passion to alleviate poverty in the global south through real economic development, but they want to export their Malthusian ideology as a geopolitical weapon against China. But they don't realize that the countries of the global south can see that the emperor is naked. As long as the leaders of the G7 are sitting on their high horse, like Joseph Borrell, who thinks the EU is a garden and the rest of the world is a jungle, their ideological blindfolds will mean that they are living in a delusional world. I think that one of the major foci should remain building basic infrastructure in all the countries who wish to cooperate. That is the key precondition for everything else. Then the pandemic has demonstrated that the building of the global health Silk Road, a modern health system in every single country on the planet, is a top priority. Obviously, the digital Silk Road carries the promise that the countries of the global south can leapfrog to some of the most advanced technologies, provided it is combined with appropriate education programs. They do not have to march through all the stages of development which the industrial countries passed through during the last 200 years, but with the help of China and like-minded countries, they will be able to catch up in the foreseeable future. The digital Silk Road will bring dramatic changes in the next period as artificial intelligence and robots will increasingly replace traditional human physical work, setting human beings free to spend much more time for lifelong learning. This means that coming generations will have a much greater opportunity to develop all potentialities embedded in every single individual, something which is now completely wasted for billions of people who have to worry that they get their meal for the next day. Naturally, the education of the mind and the aesthetic education of the character have to go along with these breakthroughs in science and technology and their application in the production process. But many Asian countries have already found the key to that problem by reviving their sometimes 5,000-year-old cultures, with an optimistic outlook for the potential of the future. So the digital Silk Road and the cultural Silk Road should be seen as part of the same project. Also, the Space Silk Road is related to that, because the extension of infrastructure into nearby space will represent the indispensable next phase in the evolution of mankind. Several countries of the Global South already have demonstrated great interest in participating in space programs. So there is all reason for optimism for the future of humanity. As one can see now, the central banks of the G7 are trapped in the hopeless contradiction between quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. Eventually, soon, only an end to the casino economy can resolve that problem. Several countries of the Global South are already reacting to the weaponization of the dollar system by designing their own international currency and a new credit system. The Chinese economic miracle demonstrates also another interesting aspect, namely that the continuous innovation eliminates the occurrence of so-called long-term economic cycles. So the countries of the West will have to make a choice in the coming period. Either they will stick to their ideologically motivated policies and become increasingly marginalized, or they will remind themselves of their better traditions and decide to cooperate with the emerging new economic order. Given the immediate threat of deindustrialization of the German economy, because the German government follows policies dictated by the Anglo-Americans in the confrontation against Russia with sanctions and weapon deliveries to Ukraine, we will go into very dramatic weeks and months in the coming winter. And if the German economy collapses, it will affect all other European economies. There are more and more people demonstrating in many German cities against the sanctions, against the high food and energy prices, and for a negotiated end to the war. Germany is an export-oriented economy, and therefore the possibility to participate in projects of the BRI in joint ventures together with China and other participating countries is the only recognizable way how a deep depression in all of Europe can be avoided. And naturally, in many countries of the Global South, there is already a total spirit of optimism concerning the chances the BRI offers to them.